Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited today to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast from Vancouver in Canada, Roy Osing, who's the author of the Be Different or Be Dead book series. Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, Roy. It's a great privilege to have you as my guest.
Thank you so much. Very grateful to be here, Jürgen. Thank you.
Now, I think there's 7 books in the Be Different or Be Dead series, and one of them we were just talking before publishes, the latest one publishes on May the 31st, and I was privileged to get a pre-published copy from you to read through. So I'm really looking forward to digging into that. It's I think the thing that struck me about the book, it's not just kind of about innovation from a textbook point of view. It's very practical. It talks about your experiences and some of the things that you've done that have proven to have worked because you've taken the organization that you build a lot of the case studies on. You've taken that organization from where it was, which was kind of a floundering company with an environment that was transitioning away from the business model that the whole company was built on, and you grew it to $1 billion in sales in that changing environment. So I'm really looking forward to digging into some of those practices and some of the mindset behind that with you today. Before we do that, and I'll frame this in context, I was watching a movie yesterday, and there was a scene there where one of the loved ones of the family was being laid to rest at a funeral. And the comment was made by one of the people that she may have left us, but the impact she's had on each of us will stay with us forever. So what's the impact you're making on the world today, Roy?
Well, I think it's probably more of I hope that I am. We'll find out. But my whole journey has been around this notion of being different, as you and I have discussed in the past, simply because I think that there's so much going on in the world today, particularly in business, that is simply not good enough, given the kinds of challenges and so forth that we face. I mean, the reason I hit on Be Different was because, in my view, when my business was going through this incredible change, is that we had to deviate from traditional stuff. It just wasn't going to work in a new world. And so I started asking the question, okay, how do we do things differently? How do we break away from the pack? How do we get rid of copying people? Because, if anything, copying just like perpetuates mediocrity, does nothing to create innovative ways, etc. So I challenged everything. I did a 180. I was contrarian. I created probably some enemies along the way because they wanted to adhere to past practices and momentum.
Change can be hard, right?
Yeah, my story is one of breakaway. I mean, I literally looked at everything I did and said, how can we break away from this? Because it wasn't going to work. And so I would hope that whenever this is done, people have started to move a little more from traditional approaches to business, traditional approaches to careers, traditional approaches to families, and moved off of that towards, why don't we try this? Why don't we try this? It's okay to fail. Let's take something risky. Let's do something insane, for God's sakes, and just have a go, right? Just have a go. So the willingness to do that, Jürgen, if I could see evidence of that, then I would go, hey, listen, it's been a good day.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love it. One of the things you talk about in the book is, and you use this term quite a lot, audacious. And I really love that. It's kind of, it makes it stand out, this idea of being different to survive. And I've got lots of examples that I've lived through in my corporate career where that wasn't done, and the result was pretty much some of those businesses don't exist today, at least not in the form that they were then, and they were healthy businesses.
Right.
But I like this idea of audacious, and you alluded to it just then when you said, you probably made enemies along the way, and that some of that's audacious because it's different and it's bold and it's courageous and all these other terms that it brings to mind. You talk about audacious leadership. Now, what do you mean by that? Give us a bit of a definition and some examples, perhaps.
Yeah, well, it's just, again, if you accept the premise that what I'm trying to do is get people to think in a breakaway mindset, not in a pivot mindset, just to lay that to rest. Like I'm not a fan of pivot, because pivot isn't audacious enough, quite frankly. It's got like turn on the fulcrum. That's what I'm talking.
Yeah.
I'm talking about get the heck out of the fulcrum and start a new vector. My math background coming. So I talk about things like being the only one, not one of many, right? Creating, not copying, executing, not planning. Like I've written an ebook called Execute First, Plan Second. Some people may look at that and say, well, that's ridiculous. Well, no, the whole premise is based on let's figure out how to plan in an execution framework so that we don't spend all of our time utilizing our intellect and nothing else. Because quite frankly, the intellect gets nothing done. Okay, it gets nothing. Now, I can take a mediocre plan, and if I execute it well, I'll beat the pants off you in the marketplace. If you think you got a pristine, beautiful plan, with ironclad kind of sheets and everything else, and then you walk away from execution. And so the audacious piece is actually juxtapositioning myself against the momentum that's behind me, that's created by the way things have always been done around here. Okay. Being contrarian, stepping out, looking at individuals and not crowds. I mean, let's face it, marketing for 150,000 years is based on mass marketing principles, right? Target something at the mass market. Well, I don't believe that mass markets exist because the premise suggests that everybody's the same. Well,
that's right.
No two people are the same. Okay. And so marketers need to figure out a way to be nose to nose with every person that they want to, launch their value proposition to. And so, they used to call it one-to-one marketing. I call it nose to nose because I got to tell you, you learn a lot more nose to nose than simply by saying one-to-one, right? Yeah. I mean, it's more visceral in it, so maybe that's the other part of this audacious thing is injecting passion and emotion into what we're doing. And that comes from lighting fires with people, okay? Lighting fires. Yeah. I mean, that's the only way things get done. They don't get done by having huge business cases. Jürgen, you know that from your background. You know that. I mean, you can't hand a business case to a frontline person and say, execute this. Yeah. They want to hear you explain to them why it's so important, and they want to buy in. And if you can't get their fires lit, you can't execute anything, you can't be audacious, and the business dies. Be different or be dead. Yeah. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
There's so much to unpack there, and you're so right with the planning part. I remember doing these massive strategic planning meetings and traveling around the world, and not only me traveling around the world, but 50, 100, 200 people traveling around the world to some location where we'd all get together, spend a couple of days. So imagine the cost of all of that, not just the travel, the hotel accommodation, the time that these people were away from their roles. And then we came up with this beautiful strategic plan. Sometimes it was published in a lovely glossy brochure.
Ooh, and it looked pretty. It looked pretty.
Sometimes it looked really pretty. And we went away. We actually went away. Sometimes we went away inspired from that. I remember one vision meeting that I went away inspired from that. And about a year later, I thought, whatever happened to that document? Where is that document? It was in my bottom drawer somewhere. It hadn't seen the light of day since then. And, I'm a person that is kind of anti these kind of things where that nothing happens as a result. And yet that's where it ended up for me. And I'm sure it was in every other person that was at that meeting. That's what it ended up for them. So to then try to have people that I was leading in my organization or interacting with customers from a point of view of here's what we're all about, and this is our vision, and this is our strategy, and this is the plan that we're going to execute. It just wasn't going to happen.
I have a very, very simple way of looking at all of this. By the way, you've just described 98%, okay, of the corporations in the world, okay, that spend 80% of their time trying to get the plan right, trying to get the plan excuse my hand. I'm trying to recover here. Trying to get the plan pristine and make it perfect. Why? Because they've been taught to. There's a prescribed way of doing this that's perpetuated by the education system and consulting community that haven't really taken a startup to $1 billion in sales, that is prescribed to be the right thing to do. So you go through, and it's pedantic as hell, you go through this process, takes 80% of the total time to actually get it right. And by the way, we have been taught to take another day to squeeze the last 10% of perfection out of that plan, right? I mean, we will not leave until we're absolutely, he goes around the room, yes, it's perfect, yes. Well, the problem with that is that by the time you finish, you don't have any time left to figure out how you're going to execute it. And so what I say is we got it wrong. We should be spending 20% of the time on the plan. This will really upset people, how ridiculous it is. 20% on the plan and 80% on executing. Now, let me explain why I say that. I'm a fan of let's head west, okay, as a good plan. A lot of people say that's not specific enough. Roy, you just can't say let's head west. And I say, sure you can. If you have an execution mindset, you say, look, victory is over there, it's west. We're going to figure out precisely where at the end of that western vector success lies for us. And we're going to do that by executing what we think is the right thing to do based on the information we have today. And that's all you've got. And it's imperfect. And so basically, the planning model that I subscribe to, that I've had to build to actually move this organization to $1 billion, is based on let's head west. Let's get it just about right. Let's start executing this imperfect thing, and let's learn from it and adjust. So I call it planning on the run as well, right? So you execute, you learn, you adjust. You execute, you learn, and adjust. And eventually, you'll discover where out west was right for you. But you don't know that when you began. You're just not smart enough. And it's not, I don't mean not smart enough, but you just
you
don't have sufficient foresight, which is kind of interesting, right? Because if you look, some people would subscribe, the vision to be good leadership. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? That's not good leadership. That's fooling the masses to say that great leaders have good vision. I mean, maybe there's a few of them, but there's not too many Steve Jobs around or used to be around, right?
And
just not.
And even a lot of those strategic plans make a heap of assumptions, right? And then, we're assuming the economy is going to go up. We're assuming the demand for our product is going to increase. We're assuming this market is going to open up. Those kind of assumptions that are fairly general, and those assumptions are based on some historical data and on people's opinions. And the moment one of those assumptions doesn't come true, or it may not come true in the time frame, because you not only have to be right about the assumption, you have to be right about the time frame that it's going to happen in, right? And
Absolutely.
The moment one of those is wrong, the whole strategy falls over. So and I don't think you're advocating just shoot an arrow into the air blindly. I think you're saying, what information do we have right now? What do we know right now? Let's take all that and let's build an execution plan around that, and an execution plan that we then learn from and we continue to add to that knowledge and fine-tune as we move forward. Is that right?
No, well, you see, I have to be careful how much precision that I'm willing to have you imply, okay? Because what I am saying is the very fact that you're standing there with a bow and arrow, okay, and you're making a decision in terms of which direction to shoot, okay? It means you've actually thought this thing through as much as you can.
Yeah.
Okay, and you've concluded that that direction is the way to go for whatever reason, whatever your intended outcome is. My point is, make that call, okay? And if it's west southwest, that's good enough. I don't want to know the precise, degree on the compass. I don't want to know that. I just don't. Nor do I want to know that it's 550 miles out versus 20 miles out. We'll find out if the 550 makes any sense once we get going. Because I can tell you, if you don't make the first 20 anyways, it's not likely you're going to make the last 420. And so let's just be a bit careful. It's not mindless. It's thoughtful imprecision, because that's all we can do, Jürgen. We can't imply precision in a world that's chaotic, that's changing on us every 48 hours.
Yeah.
The example that you just used of the assumptions changing, I can tell you what happens is the assumptions change and somebody rewrites the assumptions and they don't change the strategy.
Yeah.
Okay? Well, you can't do that. That's why I have a different planning process. Okay, my planning process.
Or they come back a year later and they say, well, we didn't achieve the results we set out to achieve because this assumption didn't turn out to be correct.
Absolutely wasn't my problem, right?
Yeah,
the economy bit me, or a competitor did a bad thing to me, Roy. I mean, so the whole reactive capabilities of the organization, which I've written a lot about, saying organizations need highly effective reactive cultures. And what I mean by that is you're never going to get the plan right. I mean, the people that say do it right the first time are aspirational crazies. Okay, because in this world, chances are you won't get it right, and it's okay to say you won't get it right, because that admits that the world is highly variable and imprecise and unexpected, right? The day you say that you think you can get it right says that linear regression formula and all the inputs and all those assumptions for a fact are going to be correct. Not true. Okay, so let's embrace imprecision in certain things, right? I'm not suggesting in terms of cardiac surgery, okay, but we're talking organizations here within an imperfect world. Let's get comfortable with that and let's figure out how to plan within that. And I did that. I have a really simple planning process that works in that kind of a world.
All right. Well, tell us about the planning process, because I found that fascinating. Well, you've opened up the door there.
That's a log. So what occurred to me is that the best planning process, at least it worked for me, and don't forget, I came from a telecom world that was voice oriented, and I was given the job of taking this data business in the early phases into the internet world. Okay, so one of the things we had to do is figure out how to make that metamorphosis work. We had to go from a voice world to a data world. We had to go from a voice culture to a highly, competitive data culture. So we had a whole bunch of things to work on there. And so execution became really the purpose of me trying to figure out how to develop a plan for that new organization. So I came up with this thing, well, we need a planning process that was built to execute. So what I did is I came up with a process that involved answering 3 questions. So if you can answer these 3 questions, only 3, then you have a viable, executable business plan. And I call it a strategic game plan. Very specifically, a game plan, because game plans are made to execute, right? They're not business plans. They're game plans. They're all focused on execution. So the first question was really simple. It says, how big do you want to be? Right? That's a question about growth. Where do you want to be in 24 months in terms of top line revenue? Not net income, not EBITDA, because I can monkey the income statement any way you want to get the right answer. This is top line revenue. That's the best metric of how the marketplace feels about your value proposition. Okay? Where do you want to be in 24 months? Do you want to grow 50%? Do you want to grow 25%? Do you want to grow 100%? If you're 50 million today, do you want to be at 100 million? Do you want to be at 75 million? Now, this is a hard question for most executives to ask themselves and answer, because they want somebody to show them that there's a trend line in here, etc., right, that they can adapt to and adopt. And I have lots of fun with executive teams trying to get them. The whole point is The nature of the strategy depends on your growth aspirations, not the other way around. The classic way of planning is to figure out the strategy and then derive the financials.
Yeah.
The problem with that is most people don't like the financials because they're not bold enough, and then they change the assumptions and they change the numbers without changing the nature of the strategy, which is insane, right? Clearly, if you want 10% growth, that gives you strategy A. If you want 50% growth, it gives you a completely different strategy. The risk profiles are different, etc. So I just got the kids off the street and said, let's get the growth thing nailed down. So we're at 10. In 24 months, we're going to be at 50. Are we good with that? And people will say, Roy, we can't do that. And I say, why? And they say, well, it's because we don't know how we're going to get there. It's not realistic. I said, that's what makes it a good plan. If you knew how to get there, it tells me the number's not bold enough. Okay, because the source of innovation, in my experience, is I don't know. If you don't know something, then you are driven to figure it out.
Yeah.
That's the innovative process, right? If you know how to get there, what motivation is there for you to be creative? You'll go and benchmark somebody and figure that out. And that's copying. That's lazy. That's bad business. Okay? So we have lots of fun with that. So we get to how big. Second question is, where are you going to get the money? Who are you going to serve? So this is about choosing the customer set that has a latent potential to give you that revenue. Okay? And that's a really good, because my angst is always about small is good, or few is good, fewer is better. And that's because of the allocation of resources, right? You know what I'm saying? I'd rather go after 3 market segments or 3 customer groups to get the extra revenue than have to go at a more mass market, which doesn't exist anyways, as we just spoke. Third question. I'm just about there. Third question, how are you going to compete and win? This gets to what you think your differential advantage is. And this is huge. This is a huge thing, because this actually forced me to come up with my way of thinking about differential advantages, which is my only statement, right? So we can talk about that later if you want. But 3 questions: how big, who are you going to serve, how are you going to compete and win? And I provide the tools for answering every one of those questions. You can do that in 2 days. I've done it in 2 days with very, very complicated businesses, and you can be executing the puppy on the 3rd day. Boom. You don't need a huge strategic planning team. You don't need to hire somebody that's going to take, half your net worth away. You don't need to do that. All you need is your executive team with all the knowledge they have in their heads, and somebody like me to pull it out. Give it some structure, not complicated, get you excited about it, and just let you go. Works like a damn.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that often is missing in these planning meetings, the old traditional way, is maintaining that excitement afterwards. And I can imagine that building that excitement over 2 days and on the 3rd day starting to execute gives that whole thing momentum, that it does maintain that excitement because there's movement happening straight away towards that outcome, towards the execution that's part of that plan.
Well, it's absolutely right. I mean, people will say, I can't believe we did that. I cannot believe that we're ready to launch this thing. Okay, I can't believe that we've actually created this, and now we're going to try and breathe life into it, because we've never done that before. The actual team building process, Jürgen, and going through this is amazing. When people start to trust each other, because when you first start out, right, and you say, well, how big are we going to be? The CEO's pressing for a big number. The soldiers aren't. And so there's a lot of dynamics, right? There's a lot of dynamics going on. But when it's all over, everybody's joined at the hips. One of the techniques I use is I go around the room and I look you straight in the eye and I say, okay, we are now going for 75 million. Jürgen, do you understand and agree? And if you even blink, I stop the whole process. We say, okay, Jürgen, not in. Okay, we need to convince him, or he needs to convince us that we should go a different direction. And that whole conversation takes place. So at the end of the day, you go around, you got 15 executives in the room, or 10 or whatever. Everybody says, yes, I understand and agree. I understand and agree. It's more than just symbolic, because when you say that, you are willing to have your actions on the table, and you're willing to be called by any other member in that room on what you do and how you do it. And so you're accountable. You're accountable to everybody else in the room. And I see vice presidents calling CEOs to say, hey, wait a minute, we agreed on this. And the reason I know this is the process I do would have quarterly reviews of this stuff. It's just not let go, right?
I was going to ask how
and so
often
they
you
would
review.
say, yeah, I mean, so they would say, well, I saw you do this, and it wasn't really consistent with the strategic game plan we just agreed to. What about that? And CEO will go, you're absolutely right. It was not consistent. Thank you. And boom, it was cathartic. It was just amazing to see the dynamics go on when you get to that level. And I've been trying to think of, like, why is it so powerful? And it's because it's so simple. I mean, there's no mystique about it. Everybody gets it. They understand the process. They learn to trust one another, and it's execution focused. It's doing stuff, and that's what people generally like.
Yeah,
I mean, after a while, the intellect gets bored of formulas, right?
And also, people are skeptical that anything comes out of those big strategic planning meetings because they know, this is the way they always go. It's sort of, okay, we'll meet again in a year, and the plan won't see the light of day in the meantime, and we'll just keep doing what we're doing. Whereas this is, as you say, action-oriented. It gets people excited, and it maintains that excitement because they're doing the actions. And I'm guessing that there's mechanisms built in to review. So if we're heading west, all of a sudden there's a fork in the road that we hadn't anticipated. There's a decision to be made that review happens to make that decision that's best in the light of what new information is available.
Absolutely right. I mean, a couple of points on that. First of all, there's a reason why I build a process around 24 planning periods of 30 days each. That's 2 years. That's 24 months. But I call them 24 planning periods of 30 days. Why? Well, because that gets you closer to thinking about execution. That's the problem with 5-year plans. The 4th year never shows up.
Yeah.
It never shows up, right? Because, people will say, oh, well, we didn't get it this year. We'll get it next year. Or the plan assumes that we get it in 40-48 months anyways. Well, all that's doing is just pushing the problem away, and it's just a joke. And so we meet every 3 months. Sometimes if something happens in the marketplace that's really significant in terms of the impact on the plan, we'll meet more frequently. But the other thing we do as well is we identify what I call a strategic hawk. Now, it's typically, I like to get the CEO to be the strategy hawk. Now, this is a person that owns execution. Their job is to make sure that the execution plan that we spend time on comes off, that it happens pristinely. That's the part you want to get perfect. That's the part you want to get flawless, right? Not the nature of the plan itself. And so we have a strategy hawk. Strategy hawk's job is a tough one because they have to have a high tolerance for pain. They have to have high currency in the organization, and they have to have an incredibly strong work ethic because execution is a really hard job. And it's a messy, dirty job. So they got to love inelegance, love getting in the trenches with frontline people, and they got to do that. And I've always had a bias that says it's got to be the CEO. CEOs cannot delegate execution to anybody. Well, I think I've probably been successful, like maybe 80% of the time, getting the CEO to step up to that, because sometimes they just wiggle out and they try and delegate it. But I always get a second strategy hawk and have a go that way. But if you have the boss on top of execution, guess what happens? You do a much better job of executing, right? I know when I
just to be clear though, you're not saying that they do things in the execution. They're responsible for seeing that it's done.
Yeah, they make sure that everybody. Yes, they do. They make sure that everybody does their job, and they hound them. They micromanage them. I will tell you right now, certain things cannot be delegated to business development. You know that. Okay, so I mean, I'm a heavy proponent of what I call strategic micromanagement. There are certain things that leaders have to do themselves. They have to put their fingerprint on the organization. And one of those things is executing a strategic plan. They have to get engaged. They have to get involved. And I've personally been involved in conflict management stuff between departments. It's as a bloody president of the company. I didn't delegate that. I couldn't. It never would have got done. It was my job to do it. And so a lot of this stuff sort of questions the traditional leadership model. You talk about audacious, I call it do it yourself. There's a huge component of audacious leadership that is do it yourself, which is I call strategic micromanagement. Because my concern is that the way people have been led to believe is that macho leaders delegate everything is bull. Okay, sure, there's some regular operational things that you can do, you can delegate, but strategic issues, you need to be owned by certain people, and you cannot delegate that, in my experience anyways. And so you just got to get down and you got to do it because you're accountable. You can't abdicate that stuff. There's too much abdication going on.
Yeah, at some point you can't delegate up or down, right? Or you can't delegate down or abdicate up in terms of responsibility, right? Somewhere it's got to stop, and somebody's got to own the outcomes.
Well, that's a huge part of the audacious way of looking at things. Is it's not about what you do to others; it's about what you assume for yourself on behalf of others. Is a huge piece of being an audacious leader. It's knowing when to get involved and put your fingerprint on things. Like, let me give you one example. I came up with this idea because I wasn't happy about the quality of customer service people we were hiring. Because don't forget, we're going through this change where instead of taking orders, we had to win customers, right? So the service piece, and as you said earlier, creating memorable experience was huge. I was not happy with the quality of customer service managers we had, and we had some frontline people that clearly, were probably better off taking inventory than dealing with customers. And so I came up with this notion that I call Goosebump recruitment. And what that was all about was trying to find people with this innate thing in their DNA that made them want to serve people. They had they had this innate drive to love human beings, want to take care of them, want to go the extra mile from them, wanted to serve them. My reasoning being, if I could get a whole bunch of those kind of people in the organization, eventually they would do what came naturally. Because you can't teach people to love humans. You can teach them to smile, and you can teach them to grin, right? And you can teach them how to have smiles in their voice, but you can't teach them to love the person on the other end of the phone. I wanted to find people that loved them. So my Goosebump recruitment process was really simple. And I actually got personally involved in this. This is another part of Roy's micromanaging. Okay, where we would have somebody in the room who was applying for a job in customer service, say, and I would be part of the panel, which was a bit intimidating, not only for the person getting interviewed, but also for the other people sitting around the table, because the president's in the room, right? It wants to know who we were hiring in the customer service. So my question would be, Jürgen, do you love people? Now, typically what you would say to me is yes, because you knew it was a trick question, right? You just knew. So you'd say yes. And I would follow up with a question that says, okay, if you love humans, tell me a story. Tell me a story that would prove to me your love of human beings. And here's where the differentiation would happen. So the person who intellectually got where I was going would give me a cold, kind of terrible story, would leave me cold like a fish, right? So I just discard that person right away. The person who really understands the question would give me a story that was warm, that was passionate, that was truthful, that was deep, that was emotional. And guess what that story did?
Goosebumps, yeah.
It gave me goosebumps. Yeah. Guess what I did? I said, boom, you got the job. In other words, I can teach you what telecom services are all about. I can teach you what a 1 gig megabit stream looks like. What I can't teach you is how to love somebody else. And I use the word love, of course, in brackets, but with that, or in parentheses. But what that brings with it is this whole emotional drive to customer service that, quite frankly, is lacking.
Yeah, the culture of
so
caring for the customer.
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say the traditional customer service experience is you call a call center up and you'll get a script. I can tell, okay, they're reading a script. Now, I usually only call up when I've got some unusual issue that is unlikely to be solved by one of their scripts. And I get so frustrated when I have to go through these questions. Like a traditional one is the IT. Have you turned the computer off? Have you rebooted? Have you checked that the power's on in your modem and all this? I say, can we skip all this stuff? Because I know what I'm doing. I'm sort of IT savvy. There's an issue with the internet. It's not actually coming in from the wires. Can you please sort of take to the next? Oh no, I've got to go through this checklist. And I think, well, they're doing a script. They don't really care about the customer. So what you're doing is basically bring people on that care about the customer. So whilst they might have...
a lot of people would tell me that that's ridiculous because, after all, we're trying to mechanize the whole world. So, Roy, you can't possibly go against the use of artificial intelligence, right? Because that's the way marketing is going. That's the way service is going. How many times have you run into a chat bot that actually gets it? Okay, so that's what you're saying. Only this is a chat bot, a live chat bot reading from a chat bot script. They're trying to algorithm. You can't create an algorithm for what you need in your moment. Okay, and that's the problem that we've got. Okay, and it's because everybody's trying to drive costs down. They're trying to shift the burden of work back to the customer, which in a lot of cases works. Like, I love doing it myself, but not when I have, just like you described, not when I have a problem. I need somebody to talk to, et cetera, et cetera. But they're trying to script or chat-botize that as well. And I find it intellectually dishonest, quite frankly, and I find it lazy, and it's humiliating. I mean, we haven't even talked about the other part of call centers, which is so funny. You can be sitting waiting for a service rep for an hour, and you've already heard the message, please do not hang up. We really like care. We really care, right? We care about your business. Please wait for the next one in line, okay? There are ways to even make that process better. I mean, I love the idea where you can actually put your telephone number in and they call you back when a rep's available. I mean, it somehow makes the process just a little easier, even though I'm walking around, I'm doing my thing, the phone rings, and I'm better with that. But don't try and BS me that you care about customer service, right? When you have me sitting on a line, because what you've really done is you've down prioritized service for cost. And so I got a huge issue with call centers. It's still being managed as a cost to be controlled as opposed to a loyalty resource. Now, Tony Hsieh, bless his soul, and God, may he rest in peace. He had it figured out with Zappos. I think you and I talked about this story before. My favorite story is he insourced his call centers. This was a loyalty center, and he said, your job is to deliver happiness. Wow. I mean, how you talk about inspiration, and he created that culture. The longest call center call in history was in a Zappos call center, and it was over an hour and a half with one customer. Now, most call center managers by that time would be apoplectic and slitting their wrists. Right? Because they'd be thinking about their numbers. Look, I know. I ran call centers. I know what goes on. I know what goes on with average holding times and all this kind of stuff. And when the numbers went out of whack in that world, it was uncomfortable for the person because costs needed to be contained. Well, I couldn't have been able to achieve what we were able to achieve without the ability to actually pull the service lever to where I wanted it to go through people that actually gave a damn about delivering the well, to them it was natural, though, right? Because these people were born with the DNA.
And so you hired basically for culture, and then you taught them the nitty gritty of the business, or the bits and pieces that they needed to know.
Yep.
Love it.
Exactly the opposite towards most people do it.
Yeah. Well, we've kind of gone deep into a couple of rabbit holes there, and a really enjoyable conversation. And there's a whole bunch of things we haven't touched on. So I think we have to schedule another session at some point.
I'm in.
Yeah.
Be awesome.
But I think it's a good point now to move on to the buzz, which is our innovation round. And I mean, a lot of these questions we've touched on, so I'm sure that you could give us a bit of a recap or something insightful to have the listener take away an action and do something awesome today as a result. Execution, right?
It's got to be execution. And the other thing is around the whole notion of be different. Like I would say to you, tomorrow, just try one thing differently. Just one thing, not a whole bunch of things. Just do one thing differently. Get used to the feeling of stepping out rather than staying in. Get used to the idea of standing out, not blending in. Just do one thing. And also while you're doing that, give up something to make room for that. Right? Give up something that you've got to get used to that.
Correct.
I do that all the time.
Excellent.
Do that all the time. How can I do it differently?
Excellent. Well, that sounds like my sort of almost last question, but we'll go through the buzz first and we'll come back to that one. What's the number one thing, and maybe this is the answer to that one, what's the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
Well, you got to be prepared to step out of the herd.
Yeah.
You got to shed yourself from the shackles of the herd. Get the hell out of the herd and start acting as an individual, because you have a lot of strengths that you haven't even begun to believe in yet, because you've been captured in crowd behavior. So get out.
Excellent. I love it. Yeah. And really discovering those strengths. Yeah. That's a big thing too. What's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas? How did you come up with a lot of these things?
Oh, man, it's called the art of trying. I mean, first of all, I understand that people basically learn things that are simple. And so I'm the simplest guy around. I do not look for complicated things. I try and figure out what are the triggers that are going to make people happy. What are the triggers that are going to get people turned on about an idea? And what I found was being able to communicate simply is an absolute key to that. Okay, not trying to talk in huge fog factor language, but in key, often edgy. I'd get criticized for swearing now and then. Big deal. Didn't care. Okay. The fact of the matter is that people got the message. So simplicity is key. Okay, and the interesting thing is when you take that journey, people look at you kind of weirdly and go, "That can't be right, Roy. That can't work. That's way too simple." Because they've been taught that complexity comes in a formula.
Yeah.
And I keep saying you can't formularize a chaotic environment where people have got to act in the moment. You can't formularize a moment. And so keep it simple, step at a time, keep the passion and the fire going to stand apart. If you just do things like that, you will be amazed at what you can achieve.
Love it. Yeah. Keep that passion going and keep things simple. Don't overcomplicate things. All right. Favorite resource? Do you have a favorite resource you use most often?
Well, I've always been a fan of the Grateful Dead. So if you will remember who the Grateful Dead were.
Absolutely.
The most famous rock band, actually the most successful touring rock band in history. Now, not too many people know about that, but it wasn't the Stones, etc. It was a Grateful Dead. Now, why do I love the Grateful Dead? First of all, probably one of the most audacious leaders around was Jerry Garcia. He actually came up with a statement that inspired me in my only statement work, because what he said rang true in the 60s and it rings true today. And it says, you don't want merely to be the best of the best. You want to be the only one that does what you do. The only one, not the best, because who the hell knows what best means anyways. So Garcia's leadership, Grateful Dead were one of the most amazing marketing organizations, and I've studied them, and I love what they do. They were customer focused. Before social media even existed, they talked to their fans, Jurgen, all the time. And they did things for their fans, right? They weren't one of these new customer addict marketing organizations that spent all their resources trying to get new customers. They invested in their existing fans. Why? Because they knew that the existing fans would tell other people, and they would get new fans that way. Smart. They have got so many lessons for organizations today. So I look at my Grateful Dead books all the time for enjoyment and for inspiration, and to remind me that they were able to do amazing things in a world that didn't have the capabilities that we have now. Grateful Dead, baby.
Okay. I think there's a whole episode in Lessons from the Grateful Dead. We'll have to,
there is.
Schedule that one in as well. Yeah.
There is.
All right. Now, what's the best way to keep a client on track? I think we've covered a lot of this, but maybe you could encapsulate it for us again.
Well, I think the most important thing is having an execution plan. Again, getting the plan just about right, but bear down on execution. And that's where you want the granularity. Who does what by when? If you have that granularity with a strategy hawk, you're well on your way to staying doing the things that you should be doing to breathe life into your strategy.
And keeping that fire of passion going for everyone.
There you go. Keeping the flame going.
Yeah. All right. And final question is right up your alley. What's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves? And I think
you got to be the only one that does what you do, Jurgen. I mean, we haven't even talked about that. We could do a whole show on that because it is so important. It's one of my missions in life these days is to get people off the claptrap of saying that they're better, saying that they're best, saying that they're number one, saying that they're market leader. To me, that's a way to avoid accountability because you can't measure it anyways. Be the only one.
It's subjective too, isn't it?
So subjective. So my thing is, my only statement is real simple. It's we are the only ones that. That's the key. That's the sort of claim that you got to figure out works for you as an individual because it applies to careers as well as organizations. And so hopefully at another time, maybe we can drill into that. But I will tell your listeners that my website, BeDifferentOrBeDead.com, has got tons of material and resources in there on the only statement. I blog every week. I try and come at this subject, a multiplicity number of ways to keep it real for people. But that's where I want to see people spend the time. It isn't about claiming that you're in business to save the planet. Okay, it's not about that, right? It just isn't, because what the hell does that mean? Really? And it's not about being in business to provide the best anything. It's to be the only one that does what you do. So you have to be only. So think about it. I'm only. What am I only at? Not what am I better at? Not what am I best at? What am I only at? Okay, so I'm glad you asked. I do have an only statement. And here's Roy's only statement. Roy is the only author, entrepreneur, and executive leader who delivers practical and proven, audacious, unheard-of ways to produce high-performing businesses and successful careers. And it's absolutely true. Nobody else talks about it. It's my territory. And that's what, by the way, I didn't do that in 5 minutes. You got to work at this for a while.
You got to work at that,
But I want people to do that. Let's do a session on only, and show people how to do it.
Excellent. Well, we might come up with a way to do that inside our community.
There you go.
It's sort of for privileged people. Anyway, give us that URL of your website where people can go and find out those exercises or see those exercises and read your blog and also find all your books as well.
Yeah, it's BeDifferentOrBeDead.com, and it's as simple as that. I've got pages, blog pages. I've got a thoughtful remarks page so you can see what other people comment on about. I mean, I get people sending me an email, Jurgen, asking me showing me their only statement saying, Roy, what do you think about this? So that's the other part of it. Feel free to communicate with me. I'm on roy.osing@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to have a conversation with anybody on a one-on-one basis. Hey, this is on me because it's my journey and it's my passion. This is not a commercial transaction. This is Roy helping somebody who believes strongly enough that wants to take the step. And I'm all about helping people who want to do that. And a blog. The blog's got a ton of stuff in there on only statement, on the strategic game plan, on crazy things that I did, on the heart attack grill in Las Vegas. It's got all sorts of fun stuff.
Excellent.
Yeah,
all right. Well, we'll post the link to the blog and the website on the show notes. And also, if you do reach out to Roy, mention that you heard him on this show so that he's got some context.
For sure. Please. It's a great
wonderful
show.
All right. Now, speaking of action, and you kind of touched on something earlier, but we'll see whether you bring us back to that. What action would you like our listener to take from today's conversation?
Well, just step outside of what you've been taught for a moment in the past, and think about what you've heard in the last 35 to 40 minutes about Be Different. Just think about that and decide whether it's something that you could subscribe to. Because I'm not trying to prescribe a solution for everybody. What I'm trying to say is that I've had extreme success doing things differently and doing things audaciously, like we've had around this conversation. And so I'm offering it as a solution for people and ideas for people that I'm convinced will work for you because they work for me. This isn't theoretical mumbo jumbo. This is real, hard, practical stuff. And so I would say, give it a try and experience it and discover for yourself the joy and the benefits and the merits of doing it, and then tell other people.
Yeah.
And let's get a movement going. Let's get a Be Different or Be Dead splinter group going in the world that lives and exists to differentiate themselves from the crowd. Wouldn't that be fun? I'd love to be a part of that crowd. That crowd I could buy into.
Yes. Love it. Okay. All right. Well, there we have it. Finally, Roy, who else should I get on this show and why?
Oh, well, I tell you what, there's a guy, and I don't know his name, but I'd love for you to get the person that owns the Heart Attack Grill in Las Vegas to come on the show and talk about why on earth he would start a business, that featured triple bypass burgers.
Yeah.
Right? Whose servers walk around in nurse uniforms.
Yeah.
Okay, so the whole thing is done in that motif, and it's just totally contrarian. The guy is just 180, right? Well, the reality is, I know about him. I'm intrigued by him. I think I'd laugh. I would like to know his story. I haven't researched him yet. Why don't you get him on and have him tell his story?
Excellent. Well, we'll have to do some research to find him. Yeah. Which city are they based in?
Las Vegas.
Las Vegas. All right. Okay. Well, that'll
Heart
give us a bit of a
Grill.
point.
They're on. You can check out his website, and it's crazy. They actually had somebody who had a coronary there, and he's okay. And I hope he didn't think that was advertising, because it wasn't.
Yeah.
But I'm not suggesting this is an insanity. But it exemplifies the nature of the beast. Okay, about stepping out and being bold to step out. It's not a pivot. It's not a pivot. It's like break away from that stuff. And he would be a really cool dude. I'll give it some thought as well, and if I can come up with others, I'm sure I can, and I'll shoot you an email.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Roy. Well, thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights and your passion and your enthusiasm for being different with us today, for audacious leadership. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I sort of regret that we're already at our time, because there were so many other things that I did want to talk about. But as we've already alluded to, we'll do this again at some point, and we may have the one statement masterclass or something like that for our community.
There you go. Now you're thinking differently. I like that. We could do that. We could build an event around it. That would be fun.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Roy. Bye.
You're very welcome. And just look at, thanks for having me, and I'm grateful to have a chance to talk to your audience. I know you've got a great audience. Thank you for having me. I'm grateful. Thanks.
Thanks, Roy.